Hello and welcome to GameSack. It's time to check out some more arcade games that were never ported to a home console. A lot of these are really cool. Not all of them though. But this first one was really fun for 1994, though it did come out a year after Namco's own Air Combat. Let's start out with Wing War from Sega, which came out in 1994. This was one of only 7 games ever to use Sega's Model 1 arcade hardware. That's right, the same hardware that ran Virtua Fighter 1 and Virtua Racing. As you can see, this is a game where you control airplanes and you get to dogfight. You start out by selecting one of 8 different planes or helicopters. You then select between dogfight and expert modes. In the dogfight mode, you fly along a linear path. You can't change directions, but you can maneuver a little bit. You start out by trying to attack your opponent. After 10 seconds or so, it switches to guard mode where the enemy is now attacking you and you need to dodge it if you can. It keeps going back and forth like this until the stage ends when the timer runs out. You have a limited number of missiles as well as a Vulcan gun, which is pretty useless. You can also fire off some smoke behind you in guard mode to try to get your enemy's missiles to miss. You both have life bars, and just as long as you have more when the stage is over, you'll win. You then move on to the next stage, of which there are only 3. If you beat all of these stages, you get to shoot down an attacking UFO which is harassing the city. Go away. No one harasses the city but me. Defeating it is pretty tough to do since it's so sporadic in its flight path. And you have to destroy it completely, meaning it can't have any life left when the stage ends. Death is the only option here. Then there's the expert mode, where it lets you fly around freely, closer to a real flight simulator. Of course, you're still dogfighting with an opponent. This game warns you that this mode is a lot tougher. Yeah, right, I've played enough Ace Combat in my life to where I find this much easier. The stages here end a lot faster since I absolutely wreck my opponents. Yeah, that's right, you didn't expect someone with a gaming experience from the 2020s to end your life so fast. Unfortunately, you don't get as many visuals here since you just fly around a certain part of the stage. I never tried flying away to see if the rest of the stage is there. Since this is a Model 1 game, you get flat shaded polygons, and I've always been a fan of this style. It doesn't look as memorable as Virtua Fighter or Virtua Racing, but it's still fairly cool. It only runs at 30 frames per second, but that's generally the nature of the Model 1 for you. I like that you can damage some of the landscape with your otherwise useless Vulcan guns. You can switch between 4 different angles of view, just like Virtua Racing. The music is energetic and it adds to the fun. Supposedly, a port to the 32X was planned, but it was cancelled after the 32X sold poorly. That's too bad, as I would have loved this for my 32X. This would have made a great Saturn game as well if they had expanded it. Well, they kind of did with Wing Arms, I guess, but that's not a port of this game. Anyway, head down to your local arcade this week and play it. Here's a game called and it's from Jalico, released in 1989. This is a beat 'em up and your goal is to hurt everyone who isn't you really bad. At first glance, it doesn't look very good. I mean, it came out 2 years after Double Dragon, which was a huge hit. Yet this one moves incredibly slow and choppy. I'm amazed that they thought this would fly in a post-Double Dragon world. The control in is pretty limited with very few moves. You can't even jump kick. The collision is also frustrating, and it feels like I have to press the joystick and buttons really hard to do anything, even though that's just psychological. The backgrounds look and scroll fine though. Sometimes colored orbs will float by. If you grab them, you can get some life back or even a temporary shield. Believe it or not, there's a reason to play this game once. That's because you can throw your enemies at the screen. Yep, just like Turtles in Time, only these guys don't get absurdly blocky, they actually animate, and each enemy has its own unique screen toss animation, aside from the palette swapped ones. Naturally, the girls lose their clothes as they fly towards the screen. I mean, why wouldn't they? This was all done 2 years before Turtles in Time as well. Sadly, that's about where the appeal to this game ends. As far as the sound goes, it's mostly pretty abrasive stuff. This was Jaleco's first beat-em-up, and it's no wonder it never made it to a console. I mean, they could have cleaned up the gameplay fine, but the throwing animations might take up a bit too much memory for the console games of 1990 or so. Anyway, now you've seen a video that shows you almost everything that's worth seeing, and so you don't really need to play it. This 1999 Sega game is called Toy Fighter, and it's exactly what the title says it is. That's right, you're toys and you fight one-on-one matches. This was developed by Anchor Incorporated, the developers behind the runaway smash hit Fighter's Destiny on the Nintendo 64. Here, you can choose between 9 different action figures. Have you ever seen Toy Story? Of course you have. Yeah, this almost feels like they may have had a Toy Story license in mind and it didn't quite pan out. I like the idea though and how the stages are presented, with a hand getting the fighters ready to go. The action controls similar to Virtua Fighter with a punch button, a kick button, and a block button that I literally never use. Certain attacks can cause more damage and they will determine how many life points a fighter will lose. You start out with 5 hearts and each one represents a life point. Being defeated with a normal attack will knock off 1 life point. A stronger attack will knock off 2, and the strongest special attacks will knock off 3. This is similar to how Fighter's Destiny worked, except that game had you earning points instead of losing them. The concept is kinda cool. There's a weird ring in place around the fighters that just keeps you close together. If both of you move in the same direction, you can move the ring all around the stage. It is weird though, and it's definitely distracting visually, but it doesn't interfere with the gameplay. The game looks nice, with some bright color and a high frame rate. It's not like you see many arcade games with a low frame rate, so I guess I'm pointing out the obvious here. The music is energetic, and so is the announcer. The game can get quite difficult after a few rounds, and it's tough to learn your moves. But stick with it long enough and it'll be no problem for you. This game was planned for a Dreamcast release, which would have been pretty easy since this runs on the Naomi system. If you didn't know, the Naomi was one of the arcade versions of the Dreamcast, just with more memory and more GPU power. I'm not sure why the game was shelved, especially given that it would have been fairly cheap to port it. But in the arcades, it remained. Alright, this next one is a bit weird, maybe even a bit pervy. Check it out. This one is called Dancing Eyes, and it's from Namco, released in 1996 only in Japan. It uses the Namco System 11, which is based on the original PlayStation hardware. This is a puzzle game where you play as a monkey. There's a person, usually a person, and it's also usually a girl who's trapped by some object. You run along lines all around an object and draw your own lines. Once you complete a line around a panel or panels, they disappear. Any enemies that were touching a line of a disappearing panel will also be destroyed, but they regenerate quickly. You need to get rid of all of the panels whilst avoiding the enemies to clear a stage. Once you clear it, the person is now free to do what they really wanted to do but couldn't because they were trapped, and now they show you. Take this idiot here for example. He's a goalie and he blocks the ball and then he kicks it into his own net, scoring one for the other team. And he's so damn proud of it too. I don't think this waste of oxygen deserved to be freed. While some say that this plays kind of like Taito's Kicks, and it kind of does, I actually think it plays more like Zoom, which was an early game on the Genesis. Remember Zoom? Yeah, not many people do, and for good reason.
Come on, boy.
Some stages here have so many panels that it can get annoying, as the enemies are very difficult to escape from and you have no defense at all. Well, you can grab the occasional power-ups which can help things, but you're still gonna die soon. You want to draw big patches to take care of a bunch of panels at once, but that runs a huge risk of being caught by an enemy. It's safer just to do a few panels at a time, but then the timer will run out. Either way, you are screwed. The graphics are adequate and of course PlayStation quality, which is to be expected. The camera angles as you move around some of the objects can get a bit weird sometimes. The sound and music are also adequate and thankfully not annoying. This game was actually going to get an HD remaster on the PlayStation 3, but it was canceled before it could come out. It was even going to use the Move controller, which would have been odd, but okay. This game is neat, but it can get a little tedious in some stages. And you gotta admit, this one is also kind of creepy. In the end, I think I'd just rather play Zoom on the Genesis. Well, honestly, this one's kind of creepy too.
Come on, boy. Come on, boy. Come on, boy.
Here's Wave Runner from Sega AM1, and it was released in 1996. It runs on the Model 2 hardware. You race your personal watercraft around 3 tracks and you do your best to win. I love me some Wave Race 64 on the Nintendo 64, so it's no surprise that I'd be drawn to this game. Believe it or not, this one and Wave Race 64 came out more or less around the same time. You don't have to navigate buoys on their correct sides in this one, you just try to go faster than everyone else. You can do tricks when you jump, but this seems to happen automatically. Other than that, there's not a whole lot to this one. But it's still very fun to play. I do wish there were some more variety between the 3 different courses. Maybe if each one had their own personality, kind of like the courses in Daytona do. The graphics are bright and colorful, featuring much more complex geometry than Wave Race. However, the waves themselves don't look as good, nor are the physics as nice. There's a lot of flickery pop-up in the distance. I'm not sure if that's the emulation or not. The music is energetic and so is the announcer, and the sound features very loud splashes to get you into the action. They could have brought this home and improved it on the Dreamcast, but by then this game was already a few years old, so maybe they didn't think there would be any interest. It's not as good as Wave Race 64, but that doesn't mean it still isn't super fun to play. But hold up, there's also Wave Runner GP, this time developed by CRI and released by Sega in 2001. This one runs on the Naomi architecture. The setup and gameplay here is exactly the same. Fortunately, this time around, each of the 3 courses have their own unique look and feel. New to this one is that the water lowers a bit on the second lap, revealing some small jump ramps. Also, you want to make sure to stay out of your enemy's wake as it affects your speed. So, nothing tremendously revolutionary. It's still fun though, even if it's basically more of the same. Unfortunately, the game is really stingy with its timer. The visuals are once again good with lots of complex geometry compared to Wave Race. The textures have much more detail this time around and basically no pop-in. This one also has an energetic announcer, and interestingly, he says a few things that remind me of what the announcer in Wave Race 64 says.
You left everybody behind! Whoa! You've been left behind!
They definitely could have released this on the Dreamcast since this is a Naomi game. Heck, why not include the tracks from the original as well and gussy them up a bit? And maybe throw in a few original tracks and modes like they did for Dreamcast Daytona. That would have made the game pretty appealing, I think. Hell, you know I would have bought it. But, sad to say, both of these games remain an arcade exclusive for now.
Go! Go! Pass him! Watch it! Your opponent's trying to slip past you! There's a slow roll dead ahead! Make your move, now! Your opponent's coming up behind you! Don't let him pass!
This one's called Extermination, and it was released by Taito in 1987. It looks like an overhead run and gun, but it actually plays a bit more like an overhead shooter since your guy can only shoot straight ahead. Basically, your life is represented by this exciting number in the lower corner. Each time you shoot an enemy, it will release a little fluff ball. If you grab it, it will increase your life by a small amount. Different colored fluff balls will give you different amounts of life. You really want all of these that you can get because if you touch an enemy, your life goes down incredibly fast. The absolute best thing though is when your life gets below 1,000 points, the annoying music goes away and you instead get an even more annoying alarm sound until you can restore enough life. Oh, it's like making love to my ears! Occasionally, you'll shoot open an entryway which leads underground. Down here, you can bust open canisters for extra power-ups. You can only hold one of these at a time, and they can do all sorts of things like a quick bomb blast, or maybe freezing enemies in place for a while, or lighting you up and making you damage enemies when touching them. Eventually, you'll get to a boss who, of course, takes tons of hits to kill. Even if you don't take any hits during the stage, 2 or 3 shots from him will kill you. Naturally, your extra power-ups are useless on him. At least this one is. Then it's off to the next level where you don't even get any life restored. Speaking of life, you get 1 life and no continues. So really, this one isn't worth playing for more than a couple of times. I'm sure it was never ported home because it's trash, though it would have been right at home on the NES with some of its less than stellar third-party efforts. There is a PlayStation 2 game called Extermination, but it's not this. Here's Aquajack from Taito, and it was released in 1989. In this one, you pilot a hovercraft as you mow down enemies. To do this, you have a reticle which you move across the screen. The control is inverted, so if you press up, your reticle moves down, which is great for flying games, not so much for moving a reticle in a hovercraft game. You do get used to it after a bit, but it never becomes ideal. You can fire an unlimited amount of your regular guns. Each of your lives has a few missiles that you can lock on in a similar style to Afterburner, but I often forget about these since there's so few available. You can boost your speed to go faster, but you need to be careful because you'll find yourself running into tons of obstacles. Like all hovercrafts, you can jump, which is honestly pretty useful for avoiding enemy fire. Naturally, each stage ends in a glorious boss fight that lasts a few seconds. Unfortunately, I don't feel that Taito put their best foot forward on this one. Granted, this was a fairly new idea at the time. However, Hydra from Atari would do this concept better in 1990. Still, this one is worth trying just to bask in its 1989-ness. The graphics are good for their time, I guess, but many of the game's 8 stages look similar. The scaling mostly works, but sometimes it's definitely a bit weird. Seriously, what just happened there? Still, I always took notice of any game which played into the screen back then, though I never saw this game in real life. It's still fun to experience these today, though. There's something about their jankiness which makes them quite a bit more enjoyable, at least for me. Okay, I've got 4 more games to show you, and only one of them is in 2D. Did you like the Gradius series? Do you wish it was more like Space Harrier? And maybe had completely forgettable music instead of the good music that the series is known for? Thankfully, Konami gave us Solaris Assault here to remedy the issue of actually enjoying playing a video game. This one came out in 1997. You can pick from 3 ships, but come on, you gotta go with the Viper. Now you fly into the screen with weird analog controls that feel quite floaty. The rules are similar to the 2D games. Collect the power-ups and upgrade your weapons when you want. When a power-up appears, it'll gradually float to the screen where you are and stick around for a second or two for you to grab, but then it floats away if you didn't get it. The game is pure chaos. It's quite difficult to keep track of everything that's going on in the madness. It's a lot easier to watch than it is to play. You have 3 lives, and if you die, you respawn right there. That's nice, but if you continue, you have to redo the entire level again. Continuing is damn expensive too. Hell, it costs 75 cents just to start the game, and then 50 cents per continue. For that kind of money, I want to continue where I die, just so I can see this game all the way to the end and then never have to touch it again. The graphics are a mixed bag, and some of them look pretty laughable, like this boss. Just look at him. Seriously, what is his deal? Like I said, the music is forgettable, which is an absolute crime in this franchise. It is a touch surprising, though, that this one never found its way home. It would have been a fun bonus in any of the PlayStation Gradius titles that were released, or even as an unlockable in Gradius 5 on the PlayStation 2. Have you ever played Hippodrome from Data East? It came out in 1989. This is a one-on-one weapons-based fighting game where a bunch of participants get together each year to see who is the best fighter in the world. Pretty original. Actually, it almost kind of was in 1989. You can't select your character, but you can select the enemy that you'd like to fight next. You have an attack button and a jump button, and that's it. There aren't really any special moves that you can do. All you need to do is win a single round. As you can see, it's pretty stiff and bland looking, much like myself. Weirdly though, it can still be kind of fun, also much like myself. When you win a round, you can spend the gold that you earn to power yourself up and buy new weapons. You have a limited amount of time to make these choices, so don't dawdle. Before each match, you can choose which weapon you'd like to use. You have a bunch of lives, but if you lose them all, you can continue. Unfortunately, that strips you of all the strength and life power-ups that you've purchased up to that point, making it very difficult to win a battle. The weapons you bought still remain selectable though. I'm quite surprised that this one didn't get ported to the Genesis early on. With the exception of the numerous voices, this could have easily been a very low megabit Genesis game and remained identical to the arcade. Of course, once Street Fighter II came out, it was all over for games of this ilk. Still, it's worth a try for a laugh. As you may recall, Sega released Star Wars Arcade in 1993. This one used the Model 1 hardware for cool flat shaded polygons, and you flew Rebel spaceships. This one was ported home to the exciting 32X platform, and the world rejoiced. But did you know that Sega followed this up in 1998 with Star Wars Trilogy Arcade, which runs on the Model 3 hardware? Because they did. This one lets you play scenes from each of the first 3 movies, and it was released before we got any of the prequel stuff. At the time, this looked pretty awesome for a Star Wars game. However, once you get into it, you find that it's not much more than a crosshair shooter. I mean, it's fine, but come on, I want to directly fly my craft like I did in the first Star Wars arcade, not just aim the crosshairs. Still, in the Star Wars level, this works pretty well. Then you move on to the Empire Strikes Back level where you fly a snow speeder. Since this is a crosshair shooter, you can't really trip the AT-ATs. You see your friends having all the fun tripping them up, but as for you, well, it's crosshair duty. Then you go into first-person mode to shoot down snowtroopers. I like how you wander into this random room where they're keeping wampas. They take a ton of hits. Like, why did you even go in here? The Return of the Jedi level is a tad boring because these speeder guys are absolute bullet sponges, or laser sponges, I guess. But hey, you can shoot Ewoks! And I try to shoot them every time I see one. I didn't even like these things when I was a kid. There are even special stages that use the lightsaber. These are the low point of the game. The control of your joystick inverts the up and down here for some reason, so it's difficult to obey the on-screen prompts. It looks really cool and it makes you want to play the game, but by the time you actually do, well, they already have your money, sucker. This could have made a decent Dreamcast game, but by then Episode 1 was already out, so we got games based on that instead. It's a short but mostly sweet playthrough that won't eat up more than a couple of bucks if you find a real machine. Oh yeah, it's Daytona USA 2 from Sega, released in 1998. This racing sequel uses the Model 3 arcade system. Like the first game, you have 3 different tracks to race on. And it's similar to the first in the length and number of laps. 8 laps for the first track, 4 laps for the second, and 2 laps for the longest and last track. The tracks here can be a bit more interesting though. The first track is another oval, but it takes place in an arena with a giant roof, and naturally it has some waterfalls in it. Pretty impressive that they were able to build this structure, if I do say so myself. The second track is nuts, as each time you go through a tunnel, the world is completely different when you come out the other end. Tons of color on this track for sure. On the later laps, you even get attacked by a giant spider alien thing. I don't remember this in NASCAR. The last track is basically New York City, which is really long and full of sharp corners. The original Daytona had endearing songs sung by Takanobu Mitsuyoshi. Here, the songs are sung by Dennis St. James, who would go on to sing the opening song for Burning Rangers on the Saturn.
Time extension. 5 laps to go.
The songs aren't bad, but it's certainly not as cheesy as the original songs. I don't know, I miss the cheesiness. However, Takanobu Mitsuyoshi can be enabled by the arcade operator, and now he sings all of the songs.
Time extension. 5 laps to go.
Ah yeah, it definitely feels more like a Daytona game now, but these songs just aren't as catchy as the first game. It is incredibly weird that this one never found its way home. Sega ported the original Daytona USA to the Dreamcast in 2001 with bunches of new tracks. One would think that they'd do this game instead. Maybe the Dreamcast wasn't quite capable of handling this one, but come on. The Saturn was several steps below the Model 2, which the original Daytona ran on, and that didn't stop them. This would have been great on the Dreamcast with a bunch of new tracks. Oh well, it just wasn't meant to be. There's another cool Sega arcade racing game that was left in the arcade, but I think I'll leave that one for next time. There you go, that was 12 more games that were released in the arcade and never found their way home. I have so much more that I want to show you, but that's going to have to wait until next time, or maybe even the time after that. I've got a bunch. But still, let me know if you have any specific recommendations on games that were released in the arcade and stayed there. Until then, thank you for watching GameSack.
Play Solaris Assault in the arcade from Konami. It is the year 6852 and planet Gradius is in danger again. Make a sally flying straight into the screen and save the planet Gradius from evil. It takes the gameplay and music you love from Gradius and absolutely thrashes it. Do you enjoy well-balanced and fun gameplay? Neither do we. So play Solaris Assault and kiss your quarters goodbye, because we offer no refunds.